perfect. Can you hear me fine and everything?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, very good. Okay. So, I'll just begin with the questions. So, and I assume you've read the script and you're familiar with the Red Rooster Line, correct? Yeah?
Yes.
So, my first question was, why do you think that the Red Rooster Line actually exists? So, why do you think that, it, for whatever reason, that there's so many red roosters in the west of Sydney and like there's almost none, in the east of Sydney?
So the Red Rooster line is about, in general, having more fast food outlets in the West. So I think other people have mentioned that also, not only necessarily in terms of Red Rooster, but other fast food outlets like McDonald's and KFCs and so on and so forth. There would be multiple reasons for that. One of the reason is affordability. So fast food tends to be the cheapest when it comes to families or larger families. So because it's cheap, so it's more affordable. Because people in Western Sydney have lower socioeconomic status and limited amount of resources. So for them, this is more affordable. There would be another reason that would be that because Western Sydney people have spent so much time for travel, because they have to, there's a job deficit in Western Sydney, which means 300,000 people every day have to travel to Eastern Sydney for to access jobs. So, and this can be long commute for them. So they are short of time. They don't have time to cook. So they fast food is an easy way for them to take out. Yet another reason can be on the eastern side, community activism to keep the fast food outlets away from their neighborhoods. And lastly, I would also say that the reason they are more in the west is because land is much cheaper. So you need a fair bit of land for an outlet like Red Rooster. You have to provide parking, etc. And in terms of the economic viability uh, of a Red Rooster, it would be difficult to get that amount of land for the amount of money they can make from it. So it's a sort of Western Sydney people are short of time. So that comes to my mind. But there have been studies on this before, and related to that, of course, is that the health outcomes. Of course, Red Rooster or fast food is just one of the health determinants, but the health outcomes in Western Sydney are quite poor, and people have written about it as well. And there is health data which indicates life expectancy in 10, 15 years lower than the Eastern Sydney.
Yeah, no, that's thank you so much. That there was some actually really good points there. So I already had thought of a few of those. Like the land is obviously cheaper, and obviously the food is actually cheaper. But I didn't think of that the one where you said they have to actually travel further. That's a very good one because, of course,
Yeah,
the average Western Sydney side is going to spend a lot longer traveling to work than the
yeah,
Eastern side. Obviously, in Eastern Sydney side, they can get home quickly. They have time to cook properly. And
yes,
often they're also socioeconomically better off, so they have the
yeah,
money and they have the time as well. When you're from Western Sydney, there's not as much time. It's so easy to just go and get some fast food. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so those are some very good reasons. Yeah. So and yeah, I find the Red Rooster Line very fascinating, and also there's like all the I'm sure you've heard like Gelato Messina, for example. There's a lot of those in the east, and Chargirls Charlie, for example. I've never actually had that. I'm not sure if you have. Um,
No, I haven't had those things because my life is 99% in Western Sydney. So I live in near Mount Druitt and I work in Penrith and specializing in the southwest and northwest Sydney. Um, Another point that I would make related to the previous question is then distances are longer in Western Sydney. So even if you were working in within Western Sydney, your job may not be necessarily close to home, and you would not have public transport taking you to many places. So for those reasons, also you would.
Hello again. Sorry about that. I'm really sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
fine. That's
So,
fine. Take your time.
are you happy to continue? Brilliant. Okay. So, and I'm just gonna turn it up. Okay. So we talked about the Red Rooster Line already. So this is obviously a bit more like I guess more pertinent to like your area of study. So why do you think that Sydney's West and Sydney's East is socioeconomically divided in the way that it is?
So to start with, all cities are, or most cities are divided. I think starting from the time when people started to live in settlements, villages. So when we move from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, so we start to have settlements, and agriculture was organized in such a way that we started to have surplus in agriculture, and that allowed people to have rulers and landlords and whatnot. So we have had this division, and Sydney is not unique in having that division. Um, uh, so the way this division works out is in most cities is that the desirable parts of the city where you have more natural and cultural amenity, um, they they are inhabited by well-off people, and less desirable places are where less well-off people live. So after industrial revolution, what happened was that um, poorer people lived close to industries, which are, or these days as well as motorways. So poorer people live in areas which are next to, close to, and historically the manufacturing industries have been in Western Sydney, and still most warehouses are. So so cities are usually divided like that, but in case of Sydney, there is an additional layer also of division, which is the application of planning system. I have written about it that we apply planning system unequally, and that leads to perverse outcomes. Also, in planning, our philosophy seems to be just dump most of the new poorly designed development in where the resistance is low, which tends to be Western Sydney. So there is, in terms of the outcome of planning system as well as application of planning system, this is unequal. So in addition to this universal problem of division in the city, we have an additional layer of planning system working only for the well-off areas.
Yeah, yeah. That all makes sense. Yeah. So I made a video about it about Marsden Park. I'm sure maybe you know like how
Yeah, I'm familiar
in
with it.
Marsden
Mhm.
yeah, like how they just like all these master planned estates are so big and then they don't necessarily plan the public transport or the schools like Marsden Park School is already overcrowded.
Mm.
You know, it's a big problem in Western Sydney. Which and I'm touching on that in the video like how there's not as many opportunities often like employment opportunities or education is never
Oh,
as
there
good.
are other lenses too.
Yeah.
So the other lenses are the our difficulties are the difficulty of heat. So Western Sydney in summer can be really heat, but also places like Marsden Park are low-lying areas. So we can have the flooding problem as well. So it was threatened in this year's floods, and the floods are going to be even more intense in future due to climate change. There is another lens which I have also analyzed data of and written somewhat, and that is the ethnic lens. So,
Hmm.
so West has changed. So West used to be the so-called Bogan land. This derogatory term that was used. Bogans, Western Sydney people were called, and it was considered to be very, or still probably there is a reputational element to it of very scary and violent. And even to start with, that reputation was undeserved. But now these places are much better, even because of the migrant communities. But these migrant communities, they live in places such as Marsden Park, etc. They can have these professional young families. Both husband and wife have professional jobs quite often in the city or maybe Macquarie Park. They travel long distances. So these places are becoming concentrated with migrants, and especially Northwest South Asian migrants. And that's uh, probably not the best for the society to have these concentrations, and partly that happens because we don't allow or we don't build much in the east, and east is becoming much more and more expensive, east and north actually. So these communities are unable to live there, so they live wherever they can, where they can afford, and where there is new construction, where there is new dwellings available. So there's that dimension to it as well. There's an ethnic dimension, there's a climate change dimension, and climate change dimension all further can be divided into heat dimension and the flood dimension. We are building at places which are not suitable to build because we cannot build where it is suitable to build because of the community activism.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because I couldn't actually get to the paper because it was behind a paywall, but I saw your paper like how in the East the government tends to listen more to the East. Like if they don't want something, that'll happen. But if the West for whatever reason, either maybe there's not as many people are saying things, there's not as much community activism, or the government just ignores it. I'm not too sure what it is, but yeah.
Yeah, the it is probably both. So in the West, we have West is highly multicultural. So people come from communities where they are not used to interacting with governments, where they can even be scared of official systems. We have communities which are not very proficient in English language. So for those kind of reasons, and also in general, lower socioeconomic communities have more pressing issues in life than paying attention to the future shape of their built environment. Whereas in Eastern Sydney, communities are attuned to their local self-benefit. They have connections with the politicians, with the journalists, with the TV channels. Many of them are probably themselves lawyers and so on and so forth. So those communities have both the ability and the resources to resist and sometimes unduly resist further development, residential development. So we are that's why we are causing this um, or deepening the city divide.
Yeah, that's exactly like um because it's like obviously like a place of comfort, like these people, they can afford to do that. They can afford to spend their time on things,
Yeah,
whereas in
yeah,
the West, maybe we're raising
yeah.
young families, they're young themselves. Yeah, so you already kind of described like some way. So you've mentioned like how the Red Rooster Line, there's also NIMBY Land and
Yeah,
Bergen
yeah.
Land. Are there any other ones you've heard?
Yeah, I've heard of a goat cheese line. I've heard
Goat Cheese Land.
so in the east and north are goat cheese areas where people are very sophisticated and have whereas people in the west they drink beer. And in your writing you have mentioned Al Jannah. So or I
Yeah.
say I'm familiar with these outlets because they are where I live, and I occasionally visit them also. So I exactly can understand what you are saying. There can be different nomenclatures for it. As far as um, I can see, I think I was the first in late 2015 who came up with this kind of a line. I didn't call it the latte line. That might have been Jeff Roberts, which came a few months later. But many people have recognized this sort of a slanting line which separates east and north from the west and southwest. And we can call it whatever, normally we use these nomenclatures to make it a bit striking so people pay attention to it. So, yeah, so that's about that line separating the two areas.
Yeah, well, exactly, because like obviously it's called we can call it the Red Rooster Line, but of course it has like many other implications. Almost like you're undermining it in a way, but like that's just the way to make it approachable, I guess,
Yeah,
for
actually,
anyone to understand. Yeah.
there's a data which sort of supports this kind of division, and that is the census's socioeconomic data. They have a index, composite index, which is called SAFA. So that SAFA index, when I plotted or mapped it for Greater Sydney, it exactly matches this inclined line. So above the line, you have very high socioeconomic advantage, and below the line you have very low level of socioeconomics or socioeconomic disadvantage. So there's data which supports that this divide exists, and there's also data which indicates that it's probably getting worse.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely do think that it's a problem. So moving on now to COVID. This is something I've always been interested in, like especially last year. It would be really interesting to hear what your take is on it. So, and I'm sure you've already read the question, and I'm sure you already know. So basically, last year during the Delta wave, the West was like subjected to very strict restrictions. Like, they had to wear masks outdoors. They had to be indoors by 6 p.m. What was the other one? They could only exercise for an hour. All these restrictions. And then in the East, not just in the East, but like mainly in the East, they had like much fewer restrictions. Like, and there were scenes of people at Bondi. And, obviously it was a big controversy around that for the entire lockdown. So, why do you personally think that the government, why did they choose to segregate the city's restrictions like that? Why didn't they just do it the same for the whole city? And of course, maybe it comes into like health as well, but what's your personal views, I guess?
Um, I don't know exactly why they did it, but I would still comment on it. There are a couple of if I could go a couple of steps back. The first thing is um, there were COVID concentrations in the east and north first. There is more international travel, much more international travel in the east and north, which was the sort of vehicle for COVID to arrive in Sydney. So the COVID was brought in by east people in the east and north because they travel much more. But once it came in, then Western Sydney people acquired it because we have to understand the nature of jobs people do. Many people in Western Sydney would be working in professions which cannot be done from home. So in Eastern West and Northern Sydney, there are people working from Western Sydney in cleaning, in hospitality, in other other jobs which don't particularly pay well, but which cannot be done from home. So which means the way mechanics worked out for the COVID spread was the COVID arrived in Eastern Sydney, brought in by people who were traveling internationally. Then Western Sydney people went there to do their jobs, which they cannot do from home. So they could be healthcare people, they could be working in restaurants or other hospitality places, they could be doing cleaning, etc. So they went there, they acquired it, and then they cannot be locked up because those jobs cannot be done from home. So this was the nature of their employment. So there's and when these restrictions were put like that on them, so it was unfair from that perspective. Also, the perspective of what happened really, how COVID arrived in Western Sydney. So I don't know if there were compelling health reasons for government or they had health advice. I haven't seen that, and I'm not sure about that. But it surely was seemed very unfair with Western Sydney people, and it has definitely left a mark on Western Sydney people. They have a very strong feeling that they are lesser people. So yeah, so that was. Or at least what needed to be done was not to use such heavy-handed measures such as police and even army on the streets. The restrictions, most people are law-abiding, I would imagine. So, and also more explanation of why this is happening and an acknowledgement of how COVID spread to Western Sydney. So I think it was done poorly of the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. If you just give me one moment, I just have to turn my light
Yes.
on. There we go. It's a bit better. Yeah, no, I agree though. Because like the lockdown, like for example, because I followed the COVID situation last year very, very
Mm,
like religiously, I guess. In Melbourne, I might be wrong here, but in Melbourne, as far as I remember, it was the same throughout the entire city. But for some reason in Sydney, Gladys Berejiklian and I guess the whole government, they decided to, segregate it. And, to this day, I guess we may never know why they did it. Like, because as you said, I'm not convinced there were compelling health reasons to do it, and I'm not even sure if it made a massive difference in the end, because we still got out of lockdown around the same time. I guess maybe it saved some lives, but the damage that it probably did to Western Sydney side was probably quite serious because, as we know, like there's obviously a perception in amongst everyone, that Western Sydney is like lesser, and I'm sure that this kind of helped it at all.
No, no, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe you already kind of touched on what are the lasting impacts of
Mm.
this. Is there anything else you'd like to add, like the lasting impact of the Delta on Western Sydney? Or,
Yeah, look, I think we need research done in this area as well. My impression is there's a lasting impact. There is a realization in Western Sydney that they are not treated equally when it not only in matters of health but other matters. And there is evidence for that. For example, Blacktown Hospital has the longest waiting list for the emergency department um, visitors, etc. So there is these signs from my perspective, from my profession, town planning in particular, and also looking at demographics. I can see that, as I mentioned, town planning has a role, and we have most new development earmarked for places which are already crowded. Actually, the density in Western Sydney or parts of Western Sydney, such as Bankstown, even Mount Druitt, etc., is now in or urban is more than density in places such as Mossman, which are very close to the city. So, and we are putting more and more people in there. So yeah, so I think what we need to do is to have research and collect evidence of what impact it has left on Western Sydney. That's something really needed.
yeah. Yeah, no, I don't doubt that there's been an effect, and it does worry me a little bit, I
Yeah.
guess, because they've always felt. I'm pretty sure like Western Sydney, it's just that feeling of being lesser, and COVID can't definitely kind of
Yeah.
helped, and it was so because I kind of touched on this in the video. It's like it's easy to almost pretend that that divide isn't there, but then when COVID struck, it was so obvious to I think
Yeah.
everyone in the city that like Western Sydney was being treated unfairly.
Yes.
And it's like we've just all washed our hands of
Yes.
it in a way,
Yes.
and it was just
Mm.
forgotten. Yeah. So I guess now in a broader spectrum, so what have your experiences been with like negative stereotypes of individuals from Western Sydney? Like yeah, either yourself, people other things like that, just
Yeah.
in general.
So my first of all, my own impression. Oh, even before I give my impression, what I would like to say is that the a lot of this negative stereotype is undeserving because um, many, or maybe let me start from my own anecdote. So it might have been 14, 15 years ago. I went for a job interview to a university in the city, and I was interviewed by the dean of a certain department. Obviously, I cannot give names or anything. So he asked me, "So where do you live?" I said, "I live in Minchinbury, which is near Mount Druitt." So he said, "How did you come here?" So I said, "I parked my car at Mount Druitt station and came to this interview. I got off at a certain station in the city." So he said to me, "Oh, gee, so when you go back, would your car still be there?" So I was absolutely shocked. Actually, the other panelists and the interview panelists were shocked too. And they tried to tone this chair person of the interview panel down a bit. But that was something. And that to this date, I recall that and say, oh
Wow.
my goodness, he had very low opinion of me and of from where I came. And I think part of the reason was he had no realization that Mount Druitt um, probably wasn't that scary to start with, and these days is not scary at all. So my son studies at a uni. He's in first year. He comes late at night at Mount Road station. I picks him up. We never feel there is anything sort of adverse, and so it's this most of this poor reputation is undeserved, but it exists, and
Yeah.
this stigma exists. So my sons went to a certain school, and which was um, in that school, their class fellows, and that was out of the area school, and they had very negative perception of the area as well. So and so my son one day came to me when he started school, and he said, "Oh, my class fellows told me we live in very dangerous area." He never felt we live in a very
Yeah.
scary area, but that he learned it from a class fellow from out of the area. So there is this reputation that the stereotype, and this is quite often by the people who have probably never visited it, so never been to this place. I'm sure the person who interviewed me and asked me if my car would be there had not visited this place, probably never ever. So and just only based his opinion on anecdote and perceptions from other people, or and probably had not looked at the crime statistics also, because Blacktown Council is not the highest crime area. The highest crime LGA is City of Sydney. So
Wow.
from if we look at the data from the Bureau of Crime Statistics, that's where the most crimes are. So, so yes, there is this negative perception, really unjustified, and quite often based on prejudice, or I don't know, whatever. People make these um, do these stereotypes without investigating or without ever. Actually, if they come to these places, some places would have very interesting food and culture, and there can be quite enjoyable. So the place I ask my students to go to is Cabramatta. So and it's a very exciting place. You can find new kind of fruits and vegetables and very interesting and affordable food. Is absolutely worth going to.
Yeah, no, I agree with them. I cannot believe that story that you just told me. That about like that interview. That's horrible. I feel like no, I've experienced that as well. I'm not from Western Sydney, but I'm in the hills, so like I'm close-ish. Obviously, the hills is on the north side, but I go to uni at Western Sydney, so I've like encountered it. When I went to high school, we people would talk about like Mount Druitt being bad, but then I had my medical placement this year there, and it's actually perfectly fine. Like the Westfield's nice, and the food is nice, and all the people were lovely. Like there's no need. It's not like it's a crime town or something, which is the reputation it has. It has that
Yeah,
reputation. Yeah.
there is not much crime. There can be occasional high profile cases reported in media, but everyday life is. I've lived there for 15 years, and so my local shopping mall is Mount Druitt. My
Yeah.
my life is there. My children went to local schools, primary schools. So yeah, so that is a very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's just very damaging. I
Yeah, and
pointed
that
out in the
might
video.
have
Yeah.
that kind of thinking might have contributed to the strict COVID lockdowns in Western Sydney, based on perception of. While I don't know what exactly the government's decision was based on, but I suspect this kind of thinking might have contributed. Oh, there is so much crime and they're criminals, so we need to be very strict with them.
Exactly. Yeah. No. That's one of my theories as well. I mean, it's obviously we can't prove it, but I do suspect the people in the government. These are people who probably aren't from Western Sydney. They probably think, oh, at West, they're not going to be as smart or as as like obedient. It's obviously very silly, but I do suspect maybe there was an element of that in the government. You know. Um, and and I guess following on from that, what do you think is the damage that's being done to our city by these stereotypes, in Western Sydney, but also the whole city.
So the damage of this stereotype, first of all, is that it doesn't allow the divide to reduce. So for the divide to reduce, there has to be people traveling across. Of course, the Western Sydney people travel to east, but more people from east traveling to west. If that happened, then visiting to the places which could be interesting, so they are missing out as well. So so the damage is we don't fill this gap which exists between the two, and as I mentioned before, this gap keeps on growing between the two parts of the city. So that is at some stage we have to understand that Western Sydney is going through a remarkable transformation in terms of its demographics, and that's an opportunity that we can use for the city as a whole. We have to have. It doesn't allow us to have the metro level thinking, like we are all Sydney-siders. So if we work like that, if we think like that, we'll have better outcomes for the metropolitan, rather than if we say, oh, this is the crime land, and we want to wash our hands from it. So a metro level thinking would be possible if we could reduce these stereotypes. And in terms of the damages, we don't do it. So we don't have metro level thinking or even action, even thinking, and surely not action.
No, yeah, exactly. Because I feel like people in the East don't tend to go, they don't tend to go out west as much. I go out west because obviously I do uni there, but also, I go to Parramatta a decent amount. Blacktown, obviously that's where I go to hospital. And I, drive up to Blue Mountains, things like that. Campbelltown as well, because that's where my campus is. But then I've heard stories of people, and I have friends who, they've not been past Granville or even or past Parramatta, further west than that in 3 years. And I don't think those people are the exception. They're not a rarity. There's a fair few people.
No, they are not. My impression is the same. I'm pretty sure the person who interviewed me had not traveled probably ever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's what concerns me. And this is why my interest has been piqued in this topic, because I think it all started with my medical placement earlier this year in Mount Druitt. It was in Wayland actually, because I observed all these people who, we all have they all just normal, perfectly normal people, and I obviously would never have been able to comprehend what exactly they would be like, because I live in where I live in West Pennant Hills, and then I'll hear perceptions, the perceptions of people out there, which is obviously damaging, and then I'll have people I'll have friends, or not just friends, but and this is part of the video. I'm planning to go to the city and ask people. We'll see what I draw up, but I'm planning on asking people, how far west have you been, and we'll kind of see. But I have a theory, and we'll see. But not many people would have been further west than Parramatta, maybe even further east. Like Strathfield even. I know some people who haven't. They just don't even go past Strathfield. So it's just yeah.
No, that's
Yeah, it's just very and it's important to we need to try and bridge that, because there's nothing wrong with the West. There's so much in the West. There's so much in Parramatta, in areas like Blacktown, Penrith, there's so much in these areas to do, to eat. There's all these festivals, and it's just a shame that we're just pretending everything's in Sydney, and that's it. Okay, so moving on, I think we're kind of towards the final question now. So and this is obviously the most important one, I guess. So how do you think that we can fix the class divide and fix I guess, in a sense, fix the Red Rooster Line that exists in Sydney?
Yeah, so I have town planning perspective on that. So I think the solution of this problem might be in the East. So in the sense that we have to build more in the East, because that's much better from a transport perspective, building closer to jobs, and also because it's not as hot, it's not as flood prone. So we have to build more in the east, and that way people from the west would be also able to live closer to work, and that might help with this social divide and this stigma. If you know people from west and they are living in your area, then that helps you. So so that's but that's easy said than done. No,
Yeah.
this is not easy, but that's part of the solution. The other possible solution is to have more jobs in West, and one possible way is to and some of that has happened, but only to Parramatta. If we could move some of the government departments further west, so maybe some departments could move um, to Blacktown or even Penrith. So then you sort of sow seeds of this new jobs activity. So other people might come in, other companies might come in. The second thing that could help Western Sydney and allow more integration is faster transport. So if we could have a fast railway line from Penrith to, we have a metro line under construction which will go up to Westmead. But if we could have it all the way up to Penrith, so that would allow that connection. Many years ago, there was a proposed line which was even designed, railway line, which was going to connect Epping with Parramatta. So that was abandoned, and that was very unfortunate because at the moment, if you have a job in Macquarie Park, and there are many jobs over there, professional job, then if you were living in Western, Outer Western, Southwestern Sydney, you don't have any train connections. It takes you forever to travel to that place. So if that connection could be built, so then you can travel from Blacktown to Parramatta and then on to Macquarie Park area through Epping. So the solution is and that is from my field. Then there would be other solutions from other professionals, such as health professionals and others, sociologists and so on and so forth. But from my perspective, from town planning perspective, we have to build more and in the east so that it's more affordable and it's closer, more dwellings closer to jobs, and we have to improve our transport connections, and that would help.
Yeah, no, that's all correct. That's all very, very valuable insight. I made a video about the Carlingford line because I live very close to it. And I personally think like it's pretty hard for me to get to Parramatta by train, because I'm near Carlingford. It's very hard. Getting to Macquarie, as well. Like if they had just built it, then people from, for example, and even in a wider perspective, people from areas like Chatswood, and like the Northern Beaches and sorry, not the North Shore, they would have been able to get west more easily. Because now, if you live in
Yeah,
Chatswood,
yeah.
it's
So
so
two
hard to
way,
get to Parramatta. Yeah,
yeah, it's two way, of course,
yeah.
and yes. So this sort of, I'm sure there are more things one can do to reduce this divide, but I mostly think from my profession's perspective, which is town planning.
Yeah. And how about the airport? So they're building obviously the airport, and they're building a new city, Bradfield there. How about that? What do you think?
Okay, so the airport is welcome, uh, but what has happened in terms of airport and Iratopolis and Bradfield City is um, the uh, the government forecast is highly optimistic in terms of how many jobs it will create. Extremely optimistic, and then that optimistic scenario is being used to build more dwellings in that area. So what I think Greater Sydney Commission got wrong was to divide city into three, the metropolitan area into three cities. They said, oh, we have a western city, a central city, and an eastern city. To my mind, that's not correct. The central and the western city are together Western Sydney, and eastern city is, yes, eastern city. So that divide, and I'm speculating a bit, probably allowed them to allocate more new residential development
Yeah.
to Sydney, because then say, oh, we are dividing it in three cities. So they were not dividing it in, east and west. So so this way it doesn't sound that much. But anyhow, coming to Aerotopolis, I think airport is good, um, because access to airport is another problem for Western Sydney people, and this might help depending on what function it has. If it is for budget airlines or if it is for international travel or not. So that we will see. But definitely in terms of what this airport will do, has been exaggerated in the government forecasting.
Yeah, that's always been a bit of a fear of mine because it all the images and the videos of the city look amazing, but it's like you have to wonder, will they actually be able to achieve that? Is there actually going to be enough people? Is there actually going to be enough employment? And because
Well,
yeah,
yeah, I think they will achieve the dwelling targets. They will never achieve the jobs targets.
mm,
So that we know for sure.
yeah,
Uh, so I have seen presentations in which people talk about this airport to be something like and, Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. So, but that is a hub. In Sydney, we are mostly a terminus. So
yeah,
this is the final destination. A hub can have much more activity around it, so and can have um, more functions than a terminus where people just. So when people come to Sydney, often it's with flights, it's their destination. They don't come here to travel somewhere else as much. So and we have a different kind of industrial structure also. So I doubt it will create um, the amount of jobs government is or the number of jobs government is forecasting is I think is
yeah,
um,
yeah.
extremely optimistic.
Yeah, no, most likely is too optimistic. Yeah, so I think we've actually pretty much covered everything. And it was very valuable insight. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you think that you'd like to mention that maybe I could put in the video or?
No, all I would like to say is that I'm very pleased to see that someone like you is taking interest, a young person, into this sort of
Thank
an
you.
issue.
Yeah,
Quite often, young people are not yet into this. This is somewhat of an activism, a very welcome one. But
yeah. Thank
I'm
you.
very happy to see. I'm happy to see that young people are taking interest.
Yeah, just
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I have done maybe about 10 media um, sort of interviews on this topic and have written another 10 articles about this. So yeah, so it's very close to my heart, and so I'm thankful to you also.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to you. It's good to hear that you're grateful to me as well. Yeah, I'm really hoping that the video does gets viewed because I feel like this is a pretty important topic. Like I've come to accept and recognize like how damaging the stereotypes have been this year, especially because I've spent so long in Western Sydney this year, and I've realized
Yeah,
like it's just like there's no need for it to be like an us and them thing. I just don't think it's
yeah,
fair.
yeah,
That we need to try and fix that. That's what I think.
yes,
And
yeah,
it's just we need to make Western Sydney more attractive, but also remove those stereotypes and try and make it more spread out. Like we need to put more housing in the east. We keep
yeah.
just stuffing it all in the west, and like no one can even afford to live in the east. But yeah, I think that covers everything though. Thank you so much,
Yeah, and
Awais.
lastly, once you have the edited version of this video, or you have hosted it on YouTube, if you could send me a link,
Oh, for sure. I
then
definitely will. Yeah, definitely will. Yeah, I think that's everything. I'll just stop the recording. And yep, there we go. Yeah, and I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Awais. Thank you so much. It was nice meeting you too. Thank you. Bye. So good. Save. Oop, okay. Converting. Cool. Nice. Okay. Bye.